Hi, thank you so much for joining. My name is Yao. I am the founder of Ajuma. Ajuma is a nonprofit that prepares Black and Latinx undergrads for business careers in tech. Our mission is to train the next generation of Black and Latino tech leaders, and our vision is to build an inclusive tech ecosystem. We offer career prep programs like Aspire, community meetups, and an online platform to help you along in your tech journey. But today, we're really excited to introduce the Bridge series, which is a live interview and Q&A hosted by Ajuma to foster dialogue around Black and Latinx experiences in the tech industry. And really excited to announce our first guest, Issac Vaughn. I got a whole spiel to read about him, and he's going to sit there and listen to it. Issac is formerly the Chief Operating Officer at Zenefits. He has over 2 decades of experience, both advocating for and contributing to the success of rapidly growing tech firms. Prior to his time at Zenefits, he held diverse positions at Ooyala, including general counsel, head of corporate development, and CEO. Before that, he co-founded Bennu Venture Group, a venture capital firm investing in disruptive enterprises. He's also led SC Investments Consulting as a managing director, overseeing angel investments and consulting for various ventures, including a sports media company. And prior to all of that, he actually spent 14 years as a partner at Wilson, Sonssi, Goodrich, and Rosati, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, representing tech companies. And his academic background includes a JD from the University of Michigan and a BS in economics from Santa Clara University. We are super excited to introduce Issac Vaughn.
Thank you.
So great to have you. So yeah, let's just start with, what are you about? Tell us about you.
So I am fundamentally about opportunity and unlocking opportunity for many people, especially those who come from traditionally underserved or disadvantaged communities, which are in the United States, largely Black and brown, folks. And my life experience, and I've been very fortunate. You read off, a number of things that I've had the opportunity to do as a professional, all was a byproduct of having access to great educational experiences, which in turn led to great professional experiences, which then gave me the opportunity to prove and demonstrate across a number of different jobs that I was capable of performing at a high level. And each time I was able to do that, that just opened up, other sets of opportunities for me. So for me, at this stage in my life, especially, I just think it's really important for those of us who have had a chance to do many things and have success at it, to do everything from their vantage point to unlock opportunity for other people. And part of the way you do that is, I believe, being willing to share your story and give people access to you in a way that may not necessarily be readily available to them, given where they are or, where they hail from.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And it's such almost like a lift as you climb mentality of not just seeing it as your own individual journey, but as you as a part of a larger collective that you're trying to bring along with you to experience the same opportunities that you've been given. And so I think Ajuma stands so much for that. And so we really appreciate that this is something that really drives and leads you. So thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So you mentioned, or I mentioned your illustrious career. And so what I think would be really helpful is if we just start with the very beginning. So you're an undergrad, help us understand, how were you thinking about your career?
Yeah.
Where were you
Yeah.
head at?
Well, you look back, in hindsight's 2020 vision, but on a prospective basis, my number one goal was to just go to college. That was something that was emphasized in my household at a very early age, even though both of my parents were, smart, well-read people, but because of life decisions, started but didn't finish college. So there was just a mantra that, my parents had with me and my two brothers, that we were going to go to college. It was like, you're going to do it. And so that was sort of the North Star, but there was no real plan in place, meaning, there was no money set aside if I got into college. There was no, start prepping for the SAT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So really, my access to college was I played football, and it turned out I was pretty good, even though I was, not the biggest. And I played quarterback. I was really talented enough that it opened up an opportunity for me to go to Santa Clara University. And I wanted to study business, but I didn't get into the business school. So I got into the School of Arts and Sciences, and the only thing that was remotely related was econ. And so the coach who recruited me said, just choose econ as a major. Now, if I knew then what I know now, I would have approached that with, joy as opposed to resignation, that this is the closest I'm going to get to business. And I say that because really what I've come to appreciate, education is just about, opening up the mind and learning how to, think and solve problems and develop core sets of skills. It's less about the specific subject matter. I mean, that's what graduate school is for. And then, of course, when you go out and you start to work in the real world. So, I was an econ major, and the only thing business-wise I was intimately familiar with was sales, because my dad was a salesman. Now, he was a wholesale liquor salesman, so he wasn't selling, office equipment, which is what I did right out of college, but he was a salesman. And so I had a healthy appreciation for what sales meant. And so that was my initial focus. And so my first job out of school was sales with the Xerox Corporation. And it was some of the best professional training I had received. And that even went beyond, my time in sales, because it was only a small percentage of my overall career. But it was foundational in terms of what it meant to be a professional, to be in an environment where there were expectations and you had to perform. That was the great thing about sales. The numbers every month, you either had them or you didn't. And so that cold reality helped me grow up, as they say, really fast, and put everything I had to bear to use. But it was in that first couple of years where I realized, though, that I didn't necessarily want to just have a career in sales, and that if I was going to unlock a broader set of opportunities, I had to really seriously think about go back to school. And then it was just a matter of, do I get my MBA? Because as much as I enjoyed the study of economics, I didn't see myself going deeper in that area. And so it became down between business or law. And I just so happened to have a mentor who was one of my assistant coaches in high school, who was in law school at the time when I met him. And he had impressed upon me that just because you study law and even practice law, it didn't foreclose other avenues being open to you. So I chose law school under the guise that it could be a means to an end and not an end to itself. And I sort of realized that a legal education combined with some practice of the law could be like a Swiss Army knife. You could use it a lot of different ways. And then, I recognized that at the time, Ken Chenault had been elevated to the CEO at American Express. Well, you read closer, he was a lawyer. And then Dick Parsons, was elevated to CEO of Time Warner. And these were a couple of the first really high profile African Americans to become CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And they were lawyers. And then I started looking around. I was like, God, there's lots of lawyers. So I was like, okay, I feel good about my decision to go to law school. Then I was able to go to a, big time law school like the University of Michigan. And then coming out of there, I got great job opportunities with major law firms. And then I kind of got lucky again in that I chose to come back to Silicon Valley, where I grew up as a young sales professional, to practice law. And the reason why I say I got lucky, it was not ground zero, but it was still early days in terms of the tech economy, which is now, drives the national economy. Apple had already gone public, but it hadn't been public that long. And, Intel had established itself, but it was certainly going through challenges. But it was right around the time that Microsoft was about to explode and software would be, the dominant, driver for many years, and then the internet. And so as a result, all of this has grown up. All this is going on around me as I'm a young lawyer. And then I was a transactional lawyer. So that had many elements of business because I was helping companies raise their early rounds of funding. I was helping companies go public. And then I was working on acquisitions when bigger companies were buying smaller companies, but the smaller companies that they were buying represented, the future growth. So what was happening, as I like to say, is I got my JD from the University of Michigan, and I got my MBA from Wilson Sonsini. I was seeing business and sophisticated business, happen, in rapid fashion and rinse and repeat over and over and over again. So I was learning a lot. It was like drinking out of the broad end of a fire hose. And I was like, man, this is unbelievable. But the one thing that was clear to me was I was like, I'm the only guy in the room that looks like me. And that also included, the bankers, and it included obviously the executives and the other service providers, including the accountants and the consultants. And I was like, man, all of this activity and ultimately all this wealth is being created. And there's just not enough people like me that are, in this room. And then over time, what happened is I started to see many of my colleagues were leaving and going to industry, initially as lawyers, some going, bypassing, the law job and operating, So two of my closest friends, both African-American gentlemen, really opened my eyes. And the first one was my best friend, to this day, David Drummond. We were teammates at Santa Clara. David made partner a year ahead of me. And, he left initially to go be the CFO of a publicly traded software company, which was a firm client. The CEO at the time was also a former lawyer at Wilson Sonsini who left and hired David away because he knew what he could do as a lawyer, transformed into a business guy. And then David ultimately got recruited to be the general counsel at Google because when he was still practicing, he was Google's first lawyer and developed a really strong relationship with Sergey and Larry. And he got over there and he never looked back. And then the other friend was a gentleman by the name of Nevin Elam. Nevin made partner a year after me, and he didn't even stick around to be a partner at Wilson. He went right into a software company as a senior executive. It might have been the CEO. And he said to me then, he goes, Isaac, if you ever decide to leave the law, one, I think you'd be really good as an operator, and two, you'll enjoy it, so much more than, the practice. Because the practice is a grind. And while I was learning a lot, it was one thing. But once, I'd become a partner, and I was a partner longer than I was an associate. So I was doing it a while. It did start to feel heavy. And I was just desirous of getting to, as they say, the other side. And that first step was the investment and consulting business, SC, that I set up with retired NFL player Ronnie Lott and a couple of other folks. And we concentrated on making, angel seed type investments in companies that were focused on the convergence of sports media and technology. So that was it was interesting. And it was a half step when I say to operating, because I wasn't operating, I was investing, but I was advising beyond just the traditional legal advice. And now I was taking on tones of business development and strategy. And that was really, really resonant with me. And then as part of this half step, I started this small co-investment fund with Ronnie and another gentleman, Daryl Wash, who was a client of mine when I was practicing law. Daryl had been a banker at Goldman, and then he went to Peter J. Solomon, and then he set up his own venture fund, Ascend Ventures, and hired me to represent them, and then some of the companies that they ultimately invested in. So Daryl, Ronnie, and I got together, and we formed Bennu, and we were able to make some really great investments, including Dollar Shave Club and Yammer, and produce great returns for our LPs and ourselves. But I started to miss kind of being in a, let's just call it, more scaled up environment, responsible for more people than just myself. And that's what led me ultimately to operate, and got an opportunity to do so initially with Ooyala, which was a very successful online video platform and ad tech provider. I initially joined as a general counsel and senior vice president, and then moved all the way into the ultimate seat, first time operating. And it kind of brought back what Nevin had said, which is, one, if you ever got the opportunity, I think you'd be really good at it. And two, you would really enjoy it. And what I really came to appreciate is, it was about the comprehensive set of skills and experiences that I had developed, which then gave me confidence to make decisions. Some of them I had not made before, but confident in my ability to make informed decisions. And then I always felt like, I could lead people, and do that as well as anybody, irrespective of whether it was a partner in a law firm or now as an executive in a business. And had great success. Took a little time off after I left Ooyala, and then joined with the CEO who originally hired me at Ooyala. He was now the CEO at Zenefits. That was a major turnaround. I grew in additional ways that I hadn't been necessarily challenged when I first started operating at Ooyala. And of course, that ended up, turning out to be, quite the success in terms of turning around a business that many had left for roadkill and dead. And I tell people all the time, irrespective of the dollar amount associated with an exit, exiting a business is hard. Getting someone else to say, we value what you have built and we're willing to pay real money for it, easier said than done. And of course, now we're in an environment where, liquidity events are few and far between. And so, having gone through it a couple of times, I know that, there's an art, and then there's a science, and then there's all the things that lead up to it. And I just feel like, I thrive in, situations where the outcome is not necessarily clear, but there's a path. And, if it's really a function of, can you execute and can you get everything going in the way that you need to, and let the exit take care of itself? And by that, I mean, I never took a job with the idea that it was going to exit. I mean, companies that I've worked in are built for exit, but most don't make it there. But instead, if you build real value, i.e., you build a company, the rest will follow. And I've just thoroughly enjoyed it, even though some of the hardest work these last 10 years or so. I'd like to say I look like I got younger, not older. Had I stayed in the law, I'd probably been the opposite. And it was really because it was really it was so good on many, many levels. And I think the people that I worked with at both companies, just some really, really talented, capable folks. And many of them I'm still friends with today. And that's not always, the case. So anyway, I told you where it began, and I took you all the way through where I right now.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. There were so many things that came up for me as you were talking through that. I think one trend I see in the way that you tell these stories is the importance of other people in each transition period. You'll say, I was working here, this person who I used to work with was working there, and then they reached out to me, and then I moved to work where they were moving, right? I think for a lot of students who are starting out in their careers, it's difficult for them to understand the value of something like networking
Yes.
or how the business world works. And so what I would love is if you could kind of talk through the importance of the people that you've worked with over time and what building those relationships meant and how it
Yes.
helped you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a cornerstone to a long and productive and rewarding career. And when I say it's a cornerstone, I believe that if you open yourself up to meeting people along the way, because there can be a tendency, especially early in our careers, to be, you know, so so focused on what just is immediately in front of me that I can diminish or discount the value of just meeting someone who may be tangential, maybe someone I don't work with directly, but has a lot of really valuable experience. And it doesn't have to be someone who's further ahead. It could be someone who is really a peer, right? When I talk about David and I talk about Nevin, we were peers, but everyone has their own, story. Everyone has their perspective, and our perspectives are formed by our life experiences. In Nevin's case, his dad was one of the early African Americans working in Silicon Valley. He worked at, one of the early semiconductor companies, Fairchild, and he had an opportunity to potentially go to Intel, but that was a risky move. And he was, this African American professional raising a family in the Valley, and he, but clearly, it was resonant with Nevin, and Nevin was in a position that his father wasn't. That when he became partner Wilson Sonsini, he didn't have to, necessarily stay. He could go down this other, sort of path. But I never would have known that if I had just seen Nevin as another talented, brother like me, but he's trying to make his way, I'm trying to make mine. But we spent a lot of time, getting to know each other because it was more than the work. And then, of course, with David, the relationship formed early on, but we continued to invest in it as we got out of college. So it wasn't just a great relationship to have in school. And then there were just countless others along the way at the firm, outside of the firm. The other thing that I really did early on is I did go out to events, especially when it would be easy for me just to stay behind my desk. I'd force myself to get up and get out. And when I tell young people about networking is not, I go to this very specific event with the hope that I meet this person and I have a chance to talk to them about that. To me, what it's really about is meeting people where they are, and not with any specific agenda other than you're going to a place that's going to attract other people who are upwardly mobile and successful. And you'll strike up, more than a few conversations that might continue in different contexts. But then what starts to happen, I believe, and certainly was the case for me, as I started to move forward and have different thoughts about what I want to do, I realized I had met someone before that worked in this particular space, or I know someone who happens to know this person, and this person has more context about who I am. So if I ask them to introduce me to a good friend of theirs, guess what? It's not a cold introduction. It's hey, I know this guy. I mean, this guy's been grinding away at Wilson Sonsini, but he's always talked about having a chance to go do something like this. So all of those things, factor into it. But I think more than anything else, I am the better for having opened myself up to so many different experiences. Like how you and I met, the School of Management, that wasn't on my radar. I mean, I was coming to New Haven because I could to support my son, but I had just joined this public company board, and the chairman of the board was like, how are you going to spend your time when you're in New Haven? I go, well, I don't know specifically. He said, have you thought about this? And if my inclination had been, I'm just going to kind of, hang out, watch my kid, and we'll travel up and down the Eastern Seaboard. And we did that for sure. I might not have jumped, but when he said, no, you ought to. And so then he says, hey, I'm going to introduce you to my Harvard Business School classmate, AJ, who's a lecturer at the School of Management. And AJ meets me and he goes, Jesus, with your background, I think Kyle with Jensen, who runs the entrepreneur, he'd love someone. So then boom, one semester turns into 2 semesters. I meet you and other students. And it's just like, And in fact, before I got on here, Yale MBA grad who happened to be in the office one of the days I was doing office hours. I met her. She's working on this great venture that has a lot of commercial real estate implications. Well, it turns out, one of my son's best friends from high school, his dad is like a legend in the Valley. He was the guy who leased, Google's campus. And before that, Silicon Graphics. And when I told him I met this really bright student from talking to you, he's like, of course. And so all of that, that's networking, right? Without, hey, Phil can do all these great things over here, and Helen's this promising student who's got this great idea, and I can connect. It's just a confluence of events. And so as you continue, and I like what you said, lift while you climb. I think continuing to lift and climb, and maybe in the beginning, you're climbing and others are lifting, but at some point you get to a place in life where you can do both, and there's nothing more rewarding and satisfying than being able to do that. And so I've always benefited from people thinking about me, not because they had to, but because they were in a position to help me, and they knew what it would mean to me, and they could, and they did, and I'm the better for it.
Yeah, that was so well said. I mean, what you're basically describing is at the end of the day, the business world is just a network of people, and everything happens through those people, right? Jobs, studies differ on this, but the vast majority of jobs never make it to LinkedIn. They never make it to, any of these job boards. They're filled through the network, right? It's through, I know this person who knows this person who knows this person.
Right.
And so it's not a surprise that throughout your life, through the people that you've known, have found new opportunities, have been introduced to other people, been able to help them do more things. So it's really good to hear from someone who's really benefited from investing in people and building relationships, how important that really is. Um, I think on the other side of the important things when you're starting out in your career, there is the relationship building, networking piece, but there's also, as you kind of mentioned, like a skills piece, right?
Yeah.
You talk a lot about going into different jobs and acquiring a skill set that people valued. And so when you think about a student, really early in their career, how do you think they should think about acquiring skills? What does that mean? And how should they think about that when starting
Yeah.
their career?
Yeah. Great question. So, when I sort of unpack, you know, my time as a lawyer, my time as, an executive in two successful software companies, an investor, it sort of breaks down into a couple of, areas. One is what I would call sort of the problem solving and the analytical skills, right? And when I would practice law, we used to say, good lawyers make their money in the gray, not the black and white. Black. And so ambiguity, um, distillation of lots of information, some related, some unrelated, and then uncertainty and developing solutions to problems that didn't lend themselves necessarily to just a black or white. And so understanding, the gray, and then risk mitigation, all of those, thinking about those things. And when even strategy, if you think about it, at its core, it's problem solving, and it's projecting and casting, into the future. You don't know what you don't know, but you try to know what you need to know, so that at least the unknown stuff you can sort of put over here and start to try to figure that out as you move forward with experience. So what I would say, a very important skill, and every employer wants it, tries to probe for it, but it's the analytical and it's the problem solving. And the other way it manifests itself is to, as a young professional, especially, how do you do when you're given little direction, but told, I want something kind of like this, right? So the person who's given it to you, they have it in their mind. They know what they want. They know it when they see it, but they may not be able to articulate it completely. And yet, when you go down that path, you have a sense that it's out there, but can I figure out what it is and go through that process, right? And that can be, really difficult for lots of young, sort of professionals. And so what I, put right next to that is, less around, can I come up with the silver bullet, but more, can I put up some process, some structure around how am I even going to go about solving the problem? Because for better or for worse, if I get it right, then I know this approach is going to be helpful in the future. And if I get it wrong, then I can at least come back to something and realize why, I was, if not doomed from the start, really not headed down the right path. So that's one set of it. The other very important set of skills is the communication piece, both oral, right? Got to be able to, speak clearly and in ways that people can follow and understand. But I would add to that the comfort in what I would call the impromptu speaking, right? Can you get up on your feet and or sitting down and someone asks you an open-ended question in the moment based on something, can you respond, right? I mean, that's a skill, and a big part of that skill is listening, active listening, but it's also, can I think, we like to say, can you think on your feet? And again, oftentimes with young professionals, someone's not necessarily, focused on what you say specifically, but how do you even respond to that? Because there's some people, it's deer in the headlights and it's like, oh shit. And other people, they may not have it right, but they're not afraid. And that tells me a lot, which is, hey, with more training, more experience, this person's capable of rising above because they're not afraid. They'll take it on, even if they don't, get it right. So that element of the communication, and then of course being able to, communicate in writing. I got to tell you, so many business people cannot write, and it's obvious to me because as a lawyer, that was the other valuable thing. You had to be able to write, whether it was an agreement, whether it was an argument, whether it was a business plan, whether it was a prospectus, how you, and when I say can't write, I'm talking about basic grammar and diction because they get lazy. It's a skill that they stopped using, especially if they're heavy, quant, heavy analytical, and don't have to do. But if you're going to, back to, for me, I wanted to rise to the ultimate top. I wanted to lead from the C-suite, right? And you can't be, I don't think, a very effective CEO if you don't have really, really strong communication skills with the pen and with the spoken word. And I prided myself on both. And I wasn't a great writer, but I become professionally a very proficient writer where I feel like, hey, I can put pen to paper on anything in the business context and certainly in the legal context, and it doesn't bother me. And then of course I have no problem. I've been doing it all my life, but as a professional and working on getting better and better, I have no problem getting up and speaking. In fact, I relish the opportunity to command the room because I know it gives me a competitive advantage. And I know that, if you are very confident in what you're saying, and then there's a lot of substance and experience behind it, it can make you a very effective, leader, as you walk the walk, talk the talk, and then you can back it all up, what you do. So those communication skills, those problem solving skills, and the collaboration piece, right? Some people are great, doing their job. They're not as good doing their job with someone else. They're not as good getting results through other people. I mean, the hallmark of great leaders are their ability to drive results through others. And the best leaders recognize that their people are going to be all over the place. So I was never one of these guys. I could only get stuff done if I had the A team. My job was to create the A team. Yeah, you need some A players for sure, but I don't need all A players. And quite frankly, a lot of A players can produce a different set of problems. But, give me a good C student who wants to be a B or an A student, meaning they're coachable, they want to be trained, they want to be developed, and they have some of these other intangibles that, they're willing to put themselves out there. Another one that I would add to the list that I came to appreciate as I got, further along in my career, but, I really try to emphasize it to young people early on: be comfortable being uncomfortable. If you can master that, and when I say master it, it doesn't mean that you take something that's uncomfortable and then you excel because you no longer feel that way. What I mean is, when you get to a place where the fact that you're anxious or the fact that you're uncomfortable or uncertain is not going to stop you from taking the opportunity or raising your hand when someone's looking for a volunteer. That, look, it's going to be high profile. And I'm telling you, the more people are willing to put themselves out there and recognize, yeah, I may swing and I may miss, but it's not fatal, man, you start to put yourself in a position where you can lap the field, because most people are going to play it safe. I want to do what I know I can. I'll take and that's okay. But once you learn that some of your greatest growth is going to come from pushing yourself in ways that you had before, and then when you actually convert on an opportunity, your confidence level soars, because you go, man, I went from not knowing to learning something that, okay, now it's opened my eyes up. So, it just allows you to go faster. And I'm not saying fast is everything, but when you start talking about the business world as a young professional, and how do I, grow and develop, and who ends up at the top? Oftentimes, the people that end up at the top are the ones that, are willing to get on that roller coaster and know that their emotions are going to ebb and flow. There's going to be some moments you're going like, oh shit, maybe I bit off more than I could chew, but you live to tell it, and you get to the other side. And then once that happens, then it's just like, what do I want to do? Because I know I'm capable of doing a lot. And now it's more about, what's the right experience, as opposed to, I want a job or I need a job. It's like, I want to do this. And it becomes a very positive reinforcer for the experiences that you go down. And then for the things that have high risk reward, attributes, the risk and the uncertainty don't bother you. But you know what? It's not fatal. But if it does, man, I'm this much further ahead. I mean, similar calculus for me, leaving the certainty of the law, albeit nothing's 100% certain, to the uncertainty of, being a business, person and all the risk that comes with it. I got to tell you, if I hadn't left, and even if I was a partner in the firm, I ain't taking a whole fall off to be in New Haven with my son, no matter how long I've been doing it. Because in the law, you got to show up every day to earn it. You got to show up every year to earn it. Business gives you a chance to, get ahead, accelerate, sort of the accumulation of financial, resources, which leads to financial independence, versus dollars for hours. Because lawyers and law firms, partners included, you're just trading dollars for hours. Now the senior partners are trading, lots of dollars for their hours, but you got to log those hours. You don't build up inventory and sell it when you decide to take a winter break. So anyway, yeah,
No.
combination of all those things. Try to make it really, really tangible, because every job. So that's why I say the last thing I would say about it is, people sometimes associate skills with titles. If you unpack roles and responsibilities, all these things that I'm talking about, they're evident in all of these things. And sometimes you may have to take something on the lower end of the strata to get in, because you don't have the requisite experience, but the opportunity to develop the skill set could be the carrot that you take, and then you just blow it out. And then you start to punch up, and take those core skills and build on them and expand them, which then can connote to more square footage that you're responsible for, more people and more upward mobility.
Yes, I love what you mentioned, honestly, about skills and decoupling them from roles. I think that something I've seen, and I did this myself, in the way that you look at entering the business world, especially, you're told, well, what do you want to be, right? I am a person that does this. At this company, this is my role, I do this, right? And it's very, as you kind of mentioned, it's a little almost short-sighted because you're looking at this long career, 40-ish, maybe more years
Yes.
during which you may do a number of different roles, right? But the skills, they transfer across, right? Like you've been an investor, an operator, a CEO, all these things. It's not like you just dumped one set of skills and then picked up a new one every time you move from thing to thing. You kind
That's
of
right.
developed this set of skills that have helped you in all these different capacities.
100, 100. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
You know, one area in the tech world where, you know, people of color especially, are way underrepresented, and it's something you and I've talked about, the whole product management side, in a tech company, that's one of the best positions because there's so many disciplines that are brought to bear. And you don't have to be a techie per se to be a good product manager, meaning in a software company, yeah, if you can write code, it's great. But if you can understand the code that's being written and you can understand as an understudy of what it means to be a product manager and you grow into that, man, that opens up a whole, slew of opportunities. But that requires someone, let's say, has a traditional finance background, an MBA, you know, going into a company in a junior role with a long-term sort of plan, and then being comfortable being uncomfortable because you're gonna have to learn something. But I tell people, look, especially people of color, if you're a Yale graduate, Harvard graduate, Princeton graduate, Michigan graduate, you're smart. I mean, like, you can learn stuff. The question then becomes, can you learn when you're not necessarily in your comfort zone, in your sweet spot, but can you see a path towards a broader set of opportunities that would come about because you're going down this road less traveled by? And that starts to get into your risk tolerance. And I think that's the other thing that's really important. We all have to know it, and I'm not saying everybody has to have a high risk tolerance, but if you determine early on that you actually have one, even though you didn't know you did, because that was the bet that I made in leaving, again, the law for the world that I ultimately went into. I realized I had a high degree of tolerance for risk and uncertainty. It was a little unnerving in the beginning, but once I learned, hey, I just got to solve problems. And for me, it was just making sure that I could stay gainfully employed because as a partner, I had created a certain lifestyle for my family and my kids, and I didn't want to disrupt that, And so I started to distill everything. Well, that's just math. It's like at the end of the day, you know, there's uncertainty about my forward earning power. Well, that's just kind of math. And by math, I mean, it's like, okay, I have this set of skills, I have this much experience. What are all the other things? And once I started thinking about it in those terms, then it was less risky and more pragmatic. Okay, sustain myself while this other thing, sort of plays out. Now, if I was your traditional lawyer who was risk averse, the minute there was a little bit of darkness, I'd have run back inside and said, "Hey, you know what? I can't deal with that. So I'll go back to trading dollars for hours." And that's okay too, if that's who you are. But my biggest fear was, man, what if I did have a tolerance for this and I could convert? What would I miss out on? And now I know the answer. I would have missed out on all the stuff that I'm doing that I wouldn't trade for the world. And I've been out of the law now longer than I was in it. And, but it wasn't as straightforward the day I decided to leave. And of course, my partners thought I was crazy, especially I was only the third Black partner in the firm. And that was a firm with 500 lawyers. So it wasn't like a small firm. So it was a big deal. But when you know what you can bear and you feel you have the requisite support and relationships, then, I say bet on you. When you learn that you can bet on yourself, then that's all you need.
That's huge. I think I'm starting to learn that more and more recently, just how important it is to invest in yourself, right? And take, understand who you are, what's brought you to where you're at, and what can you do now, given what you've managed to accomplish. Um, I think that type of self-reflection really informs, which spaces are you trying to enter and how risky can you be? Because my hypothesis is people can be riskier than they think, earlier in their career, especially.
Yes.
But it takes that time of figuring out, okay, I really think I can do this, and that's a lot of honestly the work that you do and the work that I do to try to show people that they can. Um, Speaking of that, you mentioned actually product management and how you don't necessarily have to be techie. I interned this summer at Glassdoor as a product manager. I built a feature that I think close to 1 million users are probably using at this point. Um,
No,
I don't know how to code. I,
exactly.
I don't know how to do any of that, but
Exactly.
I'm a good learner, and so I kind of
Yep.
figured out how do I in this space communicate with these people actually building the product, and I would manage to be successful at it. And so I think I for product management there are tons of other business roles as well, marketing, operations.
Yep.
Uh, all of those roles are required for the tech company to exist. None of those roles require you to know how to code, and that could
Yep.
be your way in, right? And so um, kind of where I wanted to move things next is just talking about, you mentioned wealth building, right?
Yes.
Trying to set up opportunities for yourself where you're not trading dollars for hours. Um, and I think as a student leaving undergrad, you kind of assume that that is how things work.
Yes.
Well, you work, they give you your paycheck, you use that to pay for stuff, you just keep working, and that's what you do.
Yes.
But you've seen, and a lot of people in my network have seen, there are other paths that you can take to get to the point where you're not trading dollars for money. In fact, your money is making money for you. And so I'd love to just hear from your perspective, what does that look like, and how does specifically getting into tech, within your background, how are the mechanisms, I guess, of tech for like helpful in helping you build kind of this alternate financial
Yes.
wealth decisions?
Yeah. So at the core of it is investing, right? Investing. So if you step back, right, um, you know, on a personal level, you're making a bet in you. By that I mean you're choosing to take your talent and your skill to a particular company in a particular role, and that role will afford you, you know, a certain salary, certain set of skills and experiences that you can leverage into more salary and more opportunity. But it also will yield you, at least in the tech world, an equity package, right? And so you're betting on you and your colleagues to make all of this thing worth, some multiple of what it is at the time that it hits your hands, right? So that's one, core piece of the wealth building, right? And this, stories on top of stories of, you know, people working in very successful companies and becoming, multi-millionaires. Now, again, there's extreme cases,
Let
but
me
there are
let
a
me
lot.
just. Oh, I only wanted to interrupt just so you can explain things at the student
Yes,
level.
yes,
You said a couple of things that I think students might want to hear more about. The first is equity. Do you think you can explain what equity is,
yes,
how it
yes.
factors in?
So your typical technology company um, uses equity. And in the case of most employees, that's going to manifest itself in terms of stock option grants and restricted stock grants. And that's a big part of the incentive package and why people choose to go work for a technology industry company, right? Because they're going to get a salary, they're going to get a bonus, and they're going to get an equity grant. And if you join a company early in its life cycle, you're likely to get more shares that are going to be worth a lot more in future periods when the company grows and has more value. And so when it's all said and done, that could be, value in the low to mid to high six figures. And in some cases, seven figures and beyond. And so, working at a company, and in addition to getting great experience and getting hopefully paid well, especially as the company continues to do well, you're also building these equity nest egg. And that process of wealth creation, if you will, starting with, a company getting started and then growing and developing and then ultimately having some liquidity event, that whole process, you can replicate, right? Because what starts to happen as you build your personal balance sheet, you can only work for one company. But when you get to a place in the investing world, i.e., when you become an accredited investor, which is a technical term under securities laws, that means you make either as an individual 200,000, or more, or married, combined 300,000, or have a, net worth independent of, equity in your home of $1 million, you're what is called an accredited investor, which then allows you, if given the opportunity, to invest in another private company. And so you start to build a balance sheet and a set of networks and relationships. While you can only work for one company, you can invest in many more. And once you start to invest in multiple companies, multiple startups, and they're all not going to work out, but, even investing modest sums, 10, 15, 5, 10, 15, $20,000. I started out doing just that. If it's a 5X or 10X or 20X return, all of a sudden, your money's working while you're sleeping, and you're not lifting those bricks to make that next venture successful. You're trying to figure out, which companies to spread your dollars. And it just continues to play out. And that's why, to me, it's so important, not just to work in the industry, but to build out a set of relationships, because a lot of the people that you're going to meet, they're going to go on and either start another company or work for another company, or they're going to invest, or both. And this is going to be part of your network. And before you know it, people are going to say, hey, so-and-so is starting this great company. They're going to do a seed round. They're only letting a handful of people in. If you want in, let me know, and then the next thing you know, you look up and you've built this pretty nice portfolio of, stock that could turn out to be worth a lot. And that plays out. And so you do that over a 20, 30-year period. I mean, you don't have to be Google, and there'll be a lot of companies that will monetize. And yes, we're in a tough period right now, but it ebbs and flows. It's not the end of the world. It'll come back and there'll be a shakeout, and there's probably too much money in the system anyway. But, these opportunities, they'll continue to be there. And as the face of entrepreneurship continues to broaden and expand and become more diverse and more inclusive and more equitable, it's just more opportunity. So, I tell young people, have a game, build your balance sheet, build your liquidity, make decisions that allow you to have dry powder, because there will always be, another good deal. As much as people like to think this is the one, there will be another one. And you don't have to be in them all. You just have to be in the ones that, make you some money. And you're going to lose some money. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, but you're going to make some money too. And as you do it more and you get smarter and your network becomes, more, vibrant, and lots of people make up that network, you're going to see your fair share of good opportunities to put, some of your spare cash, if you will, aside. And I think if you're very intentional about it, you can do it. It's not, it's not rocket science. It's more, attitude, discipline, and then ultimately access to opportunities. And you build access by building relationships.
Right. I mean, it's not surprising at the end of the day, building relationships is a foundational thing in making this happen.
It
Uh,
is.
but I mean, that's such a poignant point, is just that, at the end of the day, like you said very adeptly, you can only work for one company. The way to build that wealth is to work for multiple companies by putting money to work in those companies and then seeing the results. And so getting to that point looks like, I guess for a student very early in their career, it's about getting that dry powder, like you mentioned, which for those who don't understand, basically just means capital or cash that isn't necessarily doing anything.
That's right. And that translates into decisions you make as a young professional when you're making money, right? Some people are building a war chest, if you will. Others are going to consume it. And I'm not saying it's either or, but I think that, in the same way that you allocate for, you want to buy a home, I get that. You want to take a nice vacation, I get that. It's just allocate something to investing, because at some point you might get to critical mass where the money that you're continuing to invest are the profits from earlier investments. So you're not having to depend upon your main income stream. You're building up that ability to put more dollars, at risk, the proverbial, your betting house money. So everything above and beyond the return of your capital is profits. And you've got, greater discretion when you're playing with a lot of house money. And your risk profile also could be, greater. And risk in this context means earlier versus later, because a $20,000 investment in a seed is going to get me more ownership than a $20,000 investment in a late stage expansion round. So I'm going from potentially maybe 5 or 10x or 20x to, success looking 2 or 3x. 2 or 3x is great if, you're writing a 6-figure check. It's like, you can take 100,000, turn it into 200,000, you take that all day long. But on the other hand, if I can take $5,000 and turn that into 100,000 or 200,000, and I'm speaking from experience, you go, shit, that's pretty good too. And then everything in between. And then again, before you know it, you're sitting on top of that hill. And what may have seemed like, wow, I could never imagine, you're doing. And it didn't require you to, figure out how to send a man to the moon. It just was more, I understand the process, I understand the game, I'm in the game, I'm on the field, and I have a chance to make some plays. And I don't have to make them all. And somebody's going to make a lot of plays, and somebody's going to make fewer plays, but we're making plays, and we're all playing, and that's really the upshot of it all.
Yeah, I think one of the things I was thinking about as you were saying that is that you're basically describing this uh almost like a formula. You want to create dry powder, right? Which is money that you don't need for anything that's just sitting there. There's
Yep.
only really two ways to do that. You can either make more money and then put that into that pot, or you can spend less money and put that into the pot. And so early in your career, while a lot of people aren't thinking about this, you do both, maybe you choose one, but you need to find a way to put money into that pot so that you can then play the game as you've kind of described. And one of the reasons that Ajuma is so passionate about trying to get Black and Latino students excited about tech is because that first part of making more money is very doable within the tech industry, right? Tech jobs pay more than 2.5 times the national average at all points of your career. And there's the whole equity thing that you mentioned as well.
That's right.
So I guess the last thing I want to ask you is, to a student who's thinking about maybe trying to get into tech or they're not really sure what the situation is, what would you tell them about tech and whether it's worth pursuing and what that might look like?
It is definitely worth pursuing. And there are so many jobs, some of which we've talked about in technology companies, beyond being an engineer or some other very, very technical role. And I would encourage people to look at the comprehensive sets of experiences, education, and non that they have, and translate that into, you know, an initial, job or two in the industry, because the industry today is made up of people, the majority of which are not engineers or not quote unquote techies that have done amazingly well. And if you don't want to work in a company, then think about being part of the ecosystem around these companies, because these tech companies are driving the economy. So I started out as a lawyer. Other people start out as bankers. Obviously, there's the whole, venture industry. That's a little more insular and clubby, but still, there are career paths. So even if you don't want to quote unquote work in a technology company, you want to do something more traditional to start, especially coming out of business school. You know, don't take your eye off of the opportunity set that is and will continue to be the technology industry. And tech companies are readily populated with former business students who go get a mainstream experience, whether it's going to McKinsey, but next thing you know, they're trying to figure out how to get inside of a, company as a strategist or a business development person. So, you don't have to do it on day one, but I would tell people, looking back on my now over 30 years in the Valley, I mean, this is a great game, and more of us need to be in the game than on the outside of it. And there's no single way to play it. There are multiple access points. And if you have, a flexible architecture, if you will, and, you can deal with, something that's not going to always feel like it's linear. Maybe it's a little obtuse. Maybe there's some ambiguity. Yes, you're going to encounter some folks who are going to be on the challenging side, but that's going to happen anyway, most places. But, expose yourself to it. And I'd be shocked if you don't wind up like I found myself in the middle of it, and appreciative and thankful that, you went in versus just stayed on the outside, wondering what was going on inside of that building.
Well said. Well said. And so with that, this concludes our first official Bridge series. Thank you so much, Isaac, for joining us and sharing your insights. And thank you for watching. We'll definitely keep in touch. And the next Bridge series will be coming out next month. So look out for that. And yeah, thank you for joining Ajuma. Thank you again, Isaac, and have a wonderful day.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Happy holidays.